August 21st, the SBU once again delivered a devastating blow to nuclear aviation in Crimea.
Shit, that indeed hit quite hard, guys.
Russia's key airbase in the Crimean Peninsula is currently on fire.
This is fucked, gentlemen. The whole base exploded. Everything's burning.
The SBU struck 5 Russian fighter jets at the Saki airfield.
It's really scary.
The airfields have been blown up, and most importantly, 3 Su-24s, nuclear weapon carriers, have been hit.
This is just fucking insane. It's a disaster. Everything's going to burn now. More than 10 impacts.
A Su-30SM has been destroyed and another one damaged. An aviation munitions depot has been blown up. The base is engulfed in flames. Evacuation, panic.
The fuel tanks are burning. Something's burning here too, and something's burning over there in the distance as well.
Tens of millions of dollars have been lost. This is the strategic destruction of Russia's nuclear infrastructure. This is incredible. Ukraine has struck at Russia's nuclear aviation. The SBU carried out the special operation Web 2, and the Saki airfield, a key base for Russian aircraft, has been blown up and is engulfed in flames.
I swear it's all burning.
The SBU has once again delivered a devastating blow to Russia's nuclear aviation.
No one is allowed near there. It's useless to try to put it out.
This is an airfield, not a small town. It's the airfield that's burning.
Drones attacked the Saki airfield in occupied Crimea, Russia's key air base for operations over the Black Sea. 5 Russian fighter jets were damaged at the Saki airfield. 1 aircraft was completely destroyed.
It's very frightening.
We've been told to gather our documents. There might be an evacuation. Ammunition is exploding, the kind that's loaded into the planes. It's unclear how they're lying there in such a chaotic manner. In short, they could fly off in any direction.
A Su-30SM was destroyed, another was damaged, and most importantly, 3 Su-24s, nuclear weapons carriers, were hit. A series of explosions in occupied Crimea. An aviation munitions depot has been blown up. The base is engulfed in flames. Evacuation, panic, tens of millions of dollars lost. This is the strategic destruction of Russia's nuclear infrastructure. At the same time, a strike on the Frolovo railway station. Arcata is on fire.
That was a massive hit, guys.
Relay cabinets have been destroyed and traffic has stopped. In Sochi, there's a fire at the oil depot in Adler near the airport. It has ceased operations. What's burning over there?
The airport.
A drone strike has deprived the airport of fuel.
They hit the oil depot, basically. And once again, the garages, the four garages got hit.
Flights are being diverted to alternate airfields. In Kurgan, a gas distribution station is on fire and evacuation is underway. The Ukrainian armed forces attacked gas pipelines in Siberia, the Moscow region, and central Russia, including the route to Central Asia. Airports in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Volgograd, and Tambov are closed. At Pulkovo, there are hundreds of flight delays.
The Russian invaders and murderers are reciting prayers with priests. You remember, only the sound of church bells can save from drones.
There are 30-kilometer traffic jams at the Crimean Bridge, with manual inspections taking up to 7 hours. The FSB is jamming communications and the internet. Russia is in a logistical deadlock. This is no longer defense, this is an offensive. Ukraine strikes accurately, systematically, and effectively. Let's discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan right now.
Greetings, I wish everyone good health.
Roman Grigorievich, the top event, the SBU special operation, the strike on Russia's nuclear aviation. We attacked more than 5 aircraft. Tell us more about this.
The security service, they have a very special and dedicated center there that specifically deals with long-range strategic drones, which recently attacked Saki. It's clear, we've talked about Saki with you several times already. There's also Novofedorivka nearby, which is the main depot supporting Russia's naval aviation. Well, the aircraft themselves are stationed specifically in Saki, meaning it's a naval aviation airfield. Naturally, there are various Su-24s, Su-30s, and some military helicopters present there, which, by the way, were specifically supposed to intercept these incoming drones, but ultimately couldn't. Just as Army aviation sometimes reports to President Putin, we simply couldn't accomplish it, Commander. Well, Well, that's the kind of failure that happened. 5 aircraft were hit, 1 destroyed, 1 out of the 5, a Su-30, was completely destroyed. Another Su-30 was damaged, and 3 Su-24s were also damaged. They really can be carriers of nuclear weapons as well.
Roman Grigorievich reports the SBU struck 5 fighter jets at the Saki airfield, destroyed a Su-30SM, damaged another one, and destroyed 3 Su-24s, aircraft capable of carrying nuclear warheads. An aviation munitions depot was blown up, and Saki is Russia's key airbase on the Black Sea, and it has been put out of commission. Against the backdrop of Donald Trump's nuclear threats and the 2 nuclear submarines that are approaching Russia or have already approached, is the fact that we are once again attacking nuclear-capable aircraft in occupied Crimea an important signal overall?
The Su-30, Su-24, even the frontline bomber, these are tactical aircraft, but nevertheless, they can carry nuclear weapons. So in that case, this is a kind of parallel strike along with, at the very least, informational pressure on Russia from the United States. Why informational? Because, for example, in the information space, giving the order for 2 submarines to head toward the Russian coast in reality doesn't really mean much, doesn't really say anything. Why? Because first of all, some submarines are already near the Russian coast anyway, and submarines are like gophers. You can't see them, but they're there. And when, for example, Trump announces that 2 submarines are heading somewhere, they're actually not there anymore. In other words, they've already been deployed, they're already in position. It's a way of applying pressure to push for certain decisions, and also an attempt to rein in Medvedev's rhetoric. Lately, he's been having some issues with his tongue. It's gotten a bit too long. He probably needs a canning machine or a lip rolling machine or maybe a tongue rolling machine, or just have it cut off completely. So most likely Trump is trying to do this to pressure Putin into reining in Medvedev a bit, to make him watch his mouth. Because joking about nuclear weapons the way Medvedev did, well, joked in quotes, is absolutely unacceptable under any circumstances. Moreover, the Americans in this particular regard possess a rather significantly serious number of nuclear warheads, approximately 5,500, and that's just the ones publicly known and officially acknowledged, and a comprehensive array of delivery systems, including various types of submarines which are crucial for their strategic capabilities. They have enough missiles that a salvo from just 2 of the submarines Trump mentioned would be enough for the world to forget about Russia for the next 30 years. Well, in principle, that's actually not a bad idea.
Is the attack on the Saki base a tactical or strategic failure for Russia? What does this mean for us? So in this way, we are demonstrating our strength preparing for the deoccupation of the peninsula because, well, it's been a long time since we attacked airfields in Crimea so powerfully, and there haven't been such serious losses. What do you think?
Well, it's been a long time since we attacked not just the airfield, but also oil refineries and oil depots. We haven't attacked those for almost half a year. So the big question is, what was this all about? Well, I think this is a question that investigators will be asking later on as they look into the actions and inaction of our special services, including the armed forces of Ukraine. For almost half a year, there hasn't been a single oil refinery blown up, well, since about March. It's only in the last couple of days, maybe 3 or 4 days, that they've started hitting a couple of oil refineries. But before that, there really weren't any. And it's the same story with airfields. They tried to get to them. Well, there were a few strikes on airfields, to be fair. There were a few hits there. We remember the strike on Engulf. The SBU did a good job there. When they gather enough drones, it can take them a long time to collect them. Then there's a certain target designation and pretty good execution of the tasks. Like this time, Saki is located in Crimea. That's Western Crimea. So basically southwestern Crimea. So basically from a targeting perspective, it's a pretty good and in principle easy target for us. Why? Because approaching from the sea allows you to take out a large number of military facilities. So the question you asked is a good one. Why didn't it happen before? Why didn't it happen earlier? Because let's not get our hopes up yet, so we won't be disappointed later. But if there is systematic work targeting the Crimean airfields, there are 5 of them that the Russians use, then believe me, the Russians will lose at least 15 to 20% of their tactical and army aviation, including helicopters stationed there. Well, we'll see. We'll be asking Malyuk for an encore every day, so he keeps repeating it over and over.
Roman Grigorievich, there's a 30-kilometer traffic jam on the Kerch, or rather, the Crimean bridge. What does that indicate? So as I understand it, there's a manual inspection taking 7 hours according to Crimean Wind. Russia is simply in some kind of logistical dead end.
Let me clarify a bit, if I may. The Crimean Bridge is in Moscow, so if they have a traffic jam from Moscow to the Kerch Bridge, believe me, that's not a 7-hour jam, that's a 777-hour jam. It's a very big question whether they'll even make it through. And the Kerch Bridge, which right now at this moment, well, first of all, it's not exactly closed, but there is very strict control over entry and exit. And now people are trying to get in. Russians are trying to somehow reach Crimea after the carpet regime, after the destruction of some aviation, or rather aviation fuel storage facilities. They're trying, some on foot, some by car, to get to Crimea. Naturally, this is causing a traffic jam, and I understand that this jam won't clear up. It won't clear up until September. It will just keep building up. They don't have any other options. Well, there is another option. They could go to the Caspian Sea for a vacation, or to the Aral Sea if it hasn't completely dried up yet.
Dear audience, please like this video. In the comments, write a few kind words to our duo, and also let us know where you're watching from and what you think about how the armed forces of Ukraine, the security service of Ukraine, and other special services are attacking occupied Crimea, military facilities, airfields, and enemy aircraft. Let's move on to block number 2, strikes on logistics and infrastructure. A strike on the Frolovo railway junction, Arkita station, is on fire. What's happening with the railway junctions and logistics? I checked Voronezh, Rostov region, and the Moscow suburbs. We're attacking railway junctions, military trains. They're burning, as are fuel tankers. Roman Grigorievich, the floor is yours.
Well, right now there are mainly 2 railway junctions that are very important for us to stop, or at least slow down. Those are the Volgograd and Rostov junctions. Over the past 2 weeks, our defense forces' long-range strike capabilities have been reaching them. Targeting these 2 junctions is the right move because most of the fuel passes through them. Fuel goes through the Volgograd junction, and ammunition comes from Tatarstan as well as equipment from the Urals. Then several supply chains converge at the Rostov railway junction, where the flow is redistributed either toward Melitopol or Tokmak, to Mariupol, to Berdyansk, to Donetsk, to Volnovakha, and to Luhansk as well. All of this goes through Rostov. That's why it's very important for us now to stop the second wave, and it's already underway, the second wave of the Russian summer offensive deep in the rear. And disabling those same traction substations, thermal power plants, balancing capacities, and taking out high voltage power lines that supply the railway is very important for us. Why? Because even if there is a delay for just a few hours, the entire delivery schedule gets disrupted. There are certain aspects related to loading, unloading, and access to, say, certain tracks, and all of this gets disrupted for the Russians. We can strike from a distance, but these strikes must definitely be scaled up and carried out systematically, just like the strikes on oil refineries and airfields. And then in principle, it would be possible to delay the advance of Russian troops by at least 30%.
Oil depots in Sochi have been hit. The airport is not operating at full capacity. Rosneft, massive explosions. Roman Grigorievich, we are now gradually starting to attack both oil depots and refineries in remote regions. To what extent is this a systematic strategy today to destabilize the supply across all of Russia?
Well, right now, this systematic approach is visible. The main thing is not to abandon it. This has happened so many times already. Last year, our GUR security services and drone forces started destroying Russian oil infrastructure, and as if by magic, they stopped in May. This year, too, they started destroying from the beginning of the year, made pretty good progress, and then stopped in March. So now, in principle, we could maintain the same pace. If we don't slow down, and if, as you rightly said, there is systematic action, then by the end of the year, we could eliminate at least a third, maybe even half, of Russia's oil industry. Our long-range strike capabilities can, in principle, easily take out all Russian oil refineries plus oil terminals, and even the Druzhba pipeline, which passes 40 kilometers north of Semenovka. So we have this capability. The main thing is that it isn't stopped now. There have already been several strikes on that base in Sochi. Why are strikes being carried out specifically on this base? It's sort of a base, but actually it's the fuel and lubricants depot for the Sochi airfield. There's a large amount of aviation kerosene stored there, which is used to refuel Russian army aviation, including helicopters that intercept our drones. So for us, this is purely a military target. The fact that they have military aircraft stationed at the civilian airfield is really their problem. For us, it's a military target because as soon as the opportunity arises, we try to take out that aviation kerosene, although in reality, it could be eliminated even earlier at the refinery, because it doesn't just appear in the tanks out of nowhere from the fourth dimension. Now, they've set fire to a tank holding 2,000 tons. That's a serious amount of fuel. It will take several months just to restore that one tank, and God willing, a few more of theirs will burn down as well at the very least. So if the strikes don't stop, I'll say it again, by the end of the year, the Russians will have a major problem with fuel.
A strike on the gas distribution station in Kurgan, gas pipelines in Siberia, and the Moscow region heading towards Central Asia are under attack. These are the concerned citizens. Who is carrying out these actions, Roman Grigorievich, and how important are these strikes on the energy sector today, especially on gas? And again, could these strikes destabilize the supply to all of Central Russia right now?
Well, judging by the geography and the number of gas distribution stations destroyed recently, and by the way, these gas distribution stations are being destroyed near military facilities, meaning they either enter military sites or supply military facilities. Our people who care are definitely behind this. It's their job because, honestly, you could set a gas distribution station on fire with just a match, and that stops an entire production cycle if it's a military production facility, or it disrupts the vital support of a military site if it's some other kind of military facility not directly involved in production, but still, it's military. That's why, of course, we will support such actions, and we're very grateful to those who care enough to use even a single match to help ease the burden on the Ukrainian army and people by disrupting Russia's hydrocarbon industry. It's actually a pretty smart move. That is, if we're talking about gas distribution stations, but when it comes to entire gas transit routes like the Turkmen gas you're mentioning now, in other words, the main gas pipelines, then stopping them is a more complicated operation, but still possible nonetheless. I think, again, it's our concerned citizens who understand these things very well. I wouldn't rule out that these are actually local residents because, well, it's from Turkmenistan through Kazakhstan. It's quite a large, long pipeline. And there, in principle, any local resident could shut down an entire main gas pipeline. And that's why these concerned citizens are practically, you could say, our second army. And there are already at least hundreds, if not thousands, of such concerned people.
Roman Grigorievich, over the past 2 weeks, we have attacked the Leningrad region 3 times already. What is the target of these attacks? Because once again, Pulkovo airport was not operating, it was shut down for quite a long time, and there was a carpet plan for drone attacks. Previously, we somehow didn't attack the Leningrad region. It was mostly the Moscow region. If we're talking about major key cities in Russia, it's St. Petersburg and Moscow. And now, especially after the so-called celebration of the Russian Navy Day on Sunday when it took place, we began to actively attack the Leningrad region.
Well, it's 1,000 kilometers. The thing is, that's quite a significant range. Even the fierce ones, like the same beavers, might simply not make it that far. So you need to send pretty serious equipment there, almost at the level of an airplane. But nevertheless, as I understand it, we do have them, not in large numbers, admittedly, but we have them, and there is somewhere to go with them. Well, first of all, starting from Ust-Luga, which is a specific terminal for transferring various types of fuel, both gas and oil, and ending with Leni and Murmansk. That's if we're talking about that direction, at least to the north. So there are enough military facilities strategically located there for our long-range units to effectively reach and engage. But these are already considered strategic drones, specifically heavy drones. Well, in terms of the general classification of unmanned aerial vehicles, these are indeed heavy strategic drones, for which 1,000 kilometers is certainly not a particularly long or challenging distance to cover.
Now we've prepared another segment to discuss the panic in Russia's rear areas. First of all, without a doubt, there are flight delays all over Russia, an aviation collapse that is costing Russia hundreds of millions of dollars. The FSB is jamming communications. A very important point is that regional governors are coming out and telling Russians, please bear with us for a while, we'll be without communication, without internet. I read that already in 5 regions, 5 governors have made such statements. The FSB is holding a meeting. Putin is summoning the Minister of Transport for a dressing down because logistics are being disrupted. Again, there are 30-kilometer traffic jams at the Crimean bridge, inspections lasting up to 7 hours, and not just there, flight delays, growing chaos in the rear, and panic among civilians. In your opinion, can we call this a controlled crisis in the rear of the Russian Federation? And how long can Russia withstand this level of chaos?
Well, it's unlikely that this is actually controlled. In other words, this is an attempt to create chaos. And as for how to manage that chaos, the Russians will figure it out themselves, because in some areas they have competent leaders, and in others they have utterly clueless ones, sometimes so much so that they end up jumping out of windows, shouting and swearing, "Why did you throw me out?" Nevertheless, everyone has seen and understands perfectly well how the Russian special services handle these kinds of issues. So this significant chaos, which will ultimately, at the very least, severely impact the Russian economy, because any kind of, say, essential air transportation or crucial railway transportation operates on a very specific and predetermined schedule. If the schedule is disrupted in one place, it practically shuts down the entire profit-making mechanism along the whole chain, or at the very least, leads to losses as such. That's precisely why this particular situation may be considered our indirect action, specifically an indirect action indeed, but it is, in fact, a side reaction, a consequential side effect that truly results from the extensive use of our military drones against Russian military targets. And at the same time, naturally, any Russian mechanisms of movement are also coming to a halt for various reasons, one of which, at least presumably, is the inflicted damage. So let it be. Basically, if it keeps shaking, eventually it will shake itself apart and collapse. After all, the Russian Empire, the Russian Federation at this point is a colossus with feet of clay. Russia's feet of clay are its economy. And as soon as the economy is undermined, this colossus will collapse just as the Soviet Union once fell apart. For the very same reason, an economic one. So the more chaos there is, even if it's uncontrolled chaos, so be it. The main thing is that it leads to the downfall of the Russian Empire.
Roman Grigorievich, the USA, Trump, and nuclear signals. So once again, we definitely need to discuss this with you. Donald Trump has declared that the US nuclear submarines are ready, and in general, he is prepared for nuclear war. This is a very serious statement. I don't know how much of it is just empty talk, because when Donald Trump makes such statements that the US is ready for nuclear war, what kind of consequences should we expect after those words? Peskov responds, in a nuclear war, there are no winners. The Kremlin abruptly shifted its tone from threats to justifications. And here's the question. Is this a political game, or is it a real signal from the US? What should we be preparing for? And why did Moscow change its rhetoric?
Well, the thing is, Medvedev went too far. We've talked about this before. Medvedev went too far, provoking Trump in this regard. And Trump got fed up. After all, he's impulsive like that. Most likely, he got up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning and naturally started swinging his saber. He sent 2 submarines to the shores of Russia, though no one told him that they were all already off the Russian coast. They just said, everyone go. They went to carry out a combat mission. After all, this is one of the main branches of the American nuclear triad, the submarines. And naturally, just the movement itself in this direction puts pressure on Russia. It's clear that Medvedev has now been pushed under the baseboard somewhere. He won't be yapping for the foreseeable future. But this whole issue definitely needs to be played out. That's precisely why Dmitry Peskov and perhaps even Vladimir Putin himself had to begin squirming and feeling a bit uncomfortable, but Peskov is undeniably the primary individual involved. Now, most likely this tired old horse will have to come out on stage. He'll also put in his 2 cents. Lavrov. So they'll play their part, calm Trump down, so that his actions toward Medvedev are tempered. Medvedev probably won't bring up nuclear weapons anymore, or won't have the chance to, or at the very least, they'll explain to him that he shouldn't do it.
And in your considered opinion, how much of a significant deterrent is the United States Navy at this particular point in time in terms of its overall effectiveness?
Well, the US does have the largest Navy, of course, but there are certain problems now, real problems. It needs to be modernized, it needs to be restructured in certain areas. Why is that? Because, well, everyone now clearly understands that drones, not just aerial, but also underwater and surface drones, are a major problem for any Navy. And now navies all over the world will have to address this problem. And those who don't have a Navy will be rubbing their hands together, realizing that it was the right decision not to invest in one, as they say. Once upon a time, some might remember Reagan when he had that interesting skit about dinosaurs. He used to say, where are those dinosaurs, those 6-story giants? They've disappeared over all this time, but the little the bedbug survived. So it's exactly the same situation here now. Right now, all these 6-story giants, meaning the same fleet, are a very good target for small, inexpensive means of destruction of various kinds. That's why they either need to be completely rebuilt, for example, strengthening carrier groups with certain mechanisms, or, for instance, hidden away. Just like the Russian Black Sea Fleet now, they simply hid themselves like dinosaurs, started acting like little bugs, scurrying under the baseboards in Novorossiysk, and now they're sitting there quiet. They rarely come out, and even then it's mostly the submarines that try to fire off a few caliber missiles. That's it. So that's the kind of mechanism we're talking about. And now, even though the United States has, of course, a very powerful Navy, they're going to have to think about what to do with it. The only way to use the Navy now is with the carrier fleet, meaning aircraft carriers, which on the one hand can be properly protected even just by distance, and on the other hand can provide the opportunity for planes or missiles to take off and carry out their combat mission. Well, that's the current strategy of the Pentagon's restructuring.
Roman Grigorievich, there's a very interesting idea here that appeared in the text. Information surfaced in the information space that this tsunami in Kamchatka, followed by the volcanic eruption in Kamchatka, but the tsunami at first was actually a test. Some believe these were failed Russian tests, while others say it was the Americans conducting tests. And accordingly, as a result, the tsunami in Kamchatka. Moreover, there was information that a pier or something more than a pier at the Russian Federation's nuclear submarine bases was hit. As a military analyst, how can you assess this information? How likely is it to be true?
Well, it's unlikely to be external interference. Well, unlikely. Why? Because, first of all, Kamchatka is a fault zone. In other words, there are tectonic plate overlaps there. It's a serious seismic area. You would have to be completely and utterly brainless to even consider building nuclear submarine bases there, especially with nuclear weapons, which would pose an immense and unacceptable risk. Well, the Russians went a bit too far with that. Not there, it should be somewhere else, but definitely not there. Serious earthquakes happen there. Naturally, tsunamis are one of the consequences of earthquakes as well as volcanic eruptions. So that's the general picture, and any external interference with seismic centers has already been mapped out. That's why it's unlikely to be some kind of external, specifically external pressure. But as for the chancellery, the divine chancellery that is, it could have intervened, could have stepped in and put the Russians in their place a bit, because there's been too much suffering lately, too many curses upon Russian heads. And in the end, yes, the Heavenly Chancellery records all of this, and then some decision is made and the slab is moved, as they say. It's unlikely that the Americans are upset about this.
Roman Grigorievich, for the finale, I've prepared an important topic, the new command of the Air Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. President Zelensky has appointed Anatoly Krivonoshko as the new commander of the Air Forces of Ukraine, UNSHO. Before this, he had served as acting commander for a year. There is a strengthening of the air component, especially air defense and drones. In your opinion, what will this appointment change now that it is de jure? Can we expect a tougher approach in the skies?
Well, the appointment is already, well, here it is, the person. First of all, the right decision was made a year ago. For approximately a full year prior to this significant appointment, we consistently maintained and kept saying that it was absolutely and unequivocally necessary to appoint a highly experienced pilot as the supreme head, the ultimate commander-in-chief of the entire air forces.
Yes.
So they listened, yes, they listened, though only after we lost an F-16 along with our heroic pilot. They listened, yes, replaced him, and again appointed an acting commander. And for a year, they observed how a pilot could handle the air defense system. And it was decided that indeed pilots can handle it. Moreover, now the air component is becoming the top priority even within the air defense system, not to mention certain offensive aspects. Therefore, naturally, after the decision was made, a real appointment was made. Specifically, a pilot was appointed as the commander-in-chief. Now the question is about the next steps. In other words, simply replacing the commander with a pilot, or rather appointing a pilot as commander-in-chief, is not enough. The entire system of our air forces needs to be restructured around the flight mission. That is, all heads of air command posts, all managers along the command vertical, at least as far as the air forces are concerned, should be pilots. This is very important. So right now, at this very moment in time, that's only half of the entire job. At this particular point, it is only half done. We absolutely need to see it through to its completion and completely replace the entire command vertical within the air forces with qualified flight personnel. Only then can we say that our air forces will be not only a serious defensive mechanism, but also a formidable offensive force, which is exactly what they should be, because it is precisely the air component that in the third millennium forms the main paradigm for conducting offensive operations.
Roman Grigorievich, should we expect our allies to eventually provide us with JASSM missiles, Taurus missiles, other types of missiles, and of course Tomahawks as the final step?
Well, Tomahawks are probably unlikely. After all, only Typhoons can be used as launch platforms for us, although a few Tomahawks might be provided just for show, nothing more. But I'll repeat once again, to launch them here, we would need either submarines with torpedo tubes or vertical launch systems like the Mk-45 on submarines. There are such silos, launch installations, or a ship-based Mk-41 launch system, which has 64 silos. But to get it from a ship, well, it's unlikely anyone would give us a ship. And for example, to bury it here, like they did in concrete in Romania and Poland, that's too lengthy a process just to launch Tomahawks. So that leaves just one mechanism, the Typhoon launchers, or sometimes called Typhoon, depending on the translation. Now, there aren't that many Typhoon launchers to begin with, and theoretically, purely theoretically, they could, of course, give us Tomahawks as well. But again, I'll repeat, that would be purely for show. Here, there's more hope for our own ballistic missiles. We are capable of producing them. The question for the authorities is, where has it been for the past 7 years? But for example, when it comes to JASSMs and Taurus missiles, there is definitely more hope here, because the F-16s themselves are carriers of cruise missiles. And the main thing at this stage, at least given the realities of the enemy's strong air defense and their sufficient number of SAM systems and aircraft, the optimal use of the F-16 is precisely as a launch platform for JASSMs. JASSM missiles have a range from 370 to 980 kilometers. So again, logic suggests that we should be getting them. So at the very least, we'll just have to wait for them. We'll see what Trump does depending on which side of the bed he gets up on, because when it comes to the JASSMs, it's definitely Trump who has to make the decision. Well, or it will happen if it happens at all. And as for the Taurus missiles, that's a question for Merz and Germany, of course. But again, there's a connection to the Americans there. Why? Because the Taurus is a missile that flies at extremely low altitudes, and it necessarily uses a so-called digital terrain map, which at the moment only the Americans have. Therefore, without the transfer of the digital terrain map, this missile will be an easy target at higher altitudes and won't be able to accomplish its combat mission. So once again, everything is tied to the Americans in every respect. So we'll have to wait. We'll be waiting for Trump to get up on the wrong side of the bed.
Dear audience, please like this video and leave a few kind words for our duo in the comments. Roman Grigorievich and I work together several times a week, definitely more than 3 shows. In the comments, let us know where you're watching from, share your location, and write a few warm words in support of the armed forces of Ukraine and well-known military analysts. Roman Svitan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you. And as usual, see you again on Wednesday.
Goodbye.